Picture this. You're at a job interview, they promise you the world, free coffee, flexible hours, a ping pong table in the break room, and protection from day one. You sign the contract, turn up on your first day, and discover the coffee machine's broken, flexible hours means you're flexible to their schedule, the ping pong table never existed, and oh, by the way, we can sack you whenever we fancy for the first 9 months. But before we proceed, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on the UK political insight. Thank you. Congratulations, you've just experienced what it feels like to vote Labour based on their manifesto promises. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where today we're diving into yet another spectacular U-turn from Keir Starmer's government, this time involving workers' rights, angry backbenchers, and the increasingly uncomfortable question of what exactly a manifesto promise means anymore. John McDonnell, former Shadow Chancellor and Labour's resident thorn in the establishment's side, has just accused his own party of a clear betrayal of a manifesto promise. Not a slight adjustment, not a reasonable compromise, a betrayal. Those are fighting words in politics, especially when they're coming from inside the House. The issue? Labour's flagship employment rights bill, the thing they banged on about during the election campaign like it was the second coming of workers' paradise, has been watered down so much it's practically homeopathic. Let's break down this absolute mess of a situation, shall we? So rewind to the election campaign, simpler times when Labour was in opposition and could promise the moon on a stick without actually having to deliver it. Their manifesto, that sacred document we're all supposed to take seriously, promised basic rights from day one for workers. Day one, not day 90, not day 270, day one. Specifically, they promised parental leave, sick pay, and protection from unfair dismissal from the moment you walk through the door of your new job. Sounds brilliant, doesn't it? Revolutionary even. Workers across the country probably read that and thought, finally, someone's on our side. Fast forward to now, and surprise, surprise, those day one protections against unfair dismissal have mysteriously vanished from the bill like a politician's principles when lobbying money appears. It emerged last month that Keir Starmer personally ditched this policy after employers raised objections. Employers, the people who benefit from being able to sack workers without much hassle during probation periods, weren't keen on losing that power. Shocking. And rather than sticking to the promise made to millions of voters, the government folded faster than a cheap suit in the rain. Now let's talk about John McDonnell, because this is where it gets properly spicy. McDonnell isn't some random backbencher nobody's heard of. He was Shadow Chancellor under Corbyn, he's been an MP since before some of you were born, and he's never been one to keep quiet when he thinks his party is selling out workers. On Monday night, he took to X, formerly Twitter, and absolutely laid into the government. He pointed out that Andy McDonald, another Labour MP, had tabled an amendment to ensure the government actually keeps its manifesto promise. Reasonable request, you'd think. But here's the kicker. The government set up the debate timetable in such a way that McDonnell's amendment wouldn't even be reached for discussion. Let that sink in for a moment. The government deliberately structured the debate so that an amendment trying to hold them to their own manifesto promise wouldn't get debated. That's not politics, that's procedural sabotage. It's like promising to discuss something important with your partner, then talking about everything else until they fall asleep and claiming you never got around to it. McDonnell called it shameful, and honestly, it's hard to argue with that assessment. You can disagree with him on plenty of things, but the man's got a point here. During the actual Commons debate, McDonnell wasn't alone in his frustration. Andy McDonald himself stood up and urged ministers to reconsider, warning they were making a profound mistake. He went further, saying that while there might be debate about other manifesto pledges, on this particular issue, the breach is unmistakable. Unmistakable, not ambiguous, not up for interpretation, unmistakable. He reminded everyone that shadow ministers, now actual ministers, including Starmer himself, had called day one rights the foundation of the largest uplift in employment protections for a generation. Those were their words. Foundation, largest uplift, generation. Big, bold, impressive language. And now what? They've quietly kicked that foundation away and hoped nobody would notice. Then we had Justin Mathers, former business minister, piling on. He used the word jettisoned, which is a polite parliamentary way of saying they threw it overboard like ballast when the ship started taking on water. He said this is a promise made to the British people and they have to deliver on it. Democracy has to win. Imagine being a government minister and having multiple MPs from your own party standing up in Parliament saying you've betrayed democracy and broken promises to voters. That's not a good look. That's not even a mediocre look. That's a political disaster dressed up as pragmatism. Now, here's where it gets absolutely bizarre. Angela Rayner, who was piloting this bill through the Commons before she was forced to resign from government, not over policy disagreements, mind you, but because she didn't pay enough council tax, stood up and called on MPs to vote the bill through. She described passing the bill as a battle, said progress is always a struggle, claimed it would be a historic achievement for Labour, and dramatically declared now is not the time to blink or buckle. It's a stirring speech, truly, very inspirational, except she's asking MPs to vote through a watered-down version of what they promised voters. She's essentially saying, don't blink or buckle, just accept we've already buckled, but pretend it's still a victory. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. You can't simultaneously claim this bill represents historic progress while your own backbenchers are pointing out you've removed the most important bit. It's like baking a cake, forgetting to add flour, and still expecting everyone to celebrate your culinary achievement. Sure, you've got eggs and sugar in a tin in the oven, but it's not a cake anymore, is it? Let's zoom out and look at the pattern emerging here, because this isn't happening in isolation. Labour's manifesto promised not to raise taxes on working people. That was a big deal during the campaign. Working people were defined as people who earn their living through work, not from assets or investments. Clear enough, right? Then they got into government and froze income tax salary thresholds, which is a stealth tax that absolutely hits working people. When challenged, they argued it technically isn't raising the rate of income tax, which is true in the same way that slowly filling someone's house with water isn't technically drowning them because you haven't pushed their head under. Now we've got the workers' rights situation. Two major manifesto promises, two situations where the government is either breaking them outright or engaging in semantic gymnastics to pretend they're not. This is a problem because manifestos are supposed to mean something. They're the contract between a party and the electorate. You tell us what you'll do, we vote for you based on that, you get into power and do those things. That's how representative democracy is supposed to work. When parties start treating manifestos like rough guidelines rather than binding commitments, the whole system starts to break down. Defenders of the government will argue that governing is complicated. You have to make compromises, economic realities intervene, and you can't always do everything you promised. Fair enough, nobody expects perfection, but there's a difference between adjusting timelines or scaling back ambitions and completely abandoning core promises. Day one workers' rights wasn't some minor footnote buried on page 97 of the manifesto. It was front and center. It was a headline policy. Labour made workers' rights a central plank of their electoral appeal, and now they've sawn that foundation in half and hoped nobody would notice. Let's talk about why this happened, because the optics are terrible, but the politics are revealing. Employers, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, argued that day one protection against unfair dismissal would make them extremely cautious about hiring. Their argument goes something like this: if we can't easily let someone go during a probation period, we'll be much more risk-averse about who we hire, which means fewer jobs overall, and particularly fewer opportunities for people who don't have perfect CVs or who might need more training. It's not an entirely unreasonable concern. Hiring is expensive and time-consuming, and if businesses feel locked into every hiring decision from day one, some will simply hire fewer people. The counter-argument from the pro-worker side is that the current system, where you can be dismissed for almost any reason or no reason at all during your first 2 years, creates a massive power imbalance and leaves workers incredibly vulnerable. You can work somewhere for 23 months, do a decent job, and still be sacked on a whim with limited recourse. That's not a probation period, that's nearly 2 years of precarious employment. From this perspective, businesses crying about not being able to fire people easily for 9 months is just them wanting to preserve an unfair advantage. Shocking, and rather than sticking to the promise made to millions of voters, the government folded faster than a cheap suit in the rain. Now let's talk about John McDonnell, because this is where it gets properly spicy. McDonnell isn't some random backbencher nobody's heard of. He was Shadow Chancellor under Corbyn, he's been an MP since before some of you were born, and he's never been one to keep quiet when he thinks his party is selling out workers. On Monday night, he took to X, formerly Twitter, and absolutely laid into the government. He pointed out that Andy McDonald, another Labour MP, had tabled an amendment to ensure the government actually keeps its manifesto promise. Reasonable request, you'd think. But here's the kicker. The government set up the debate timetable in such a way that McDonald's amendment wouldn't even be reached for discussion. Let that sink in for a moment. The government deliberately structured the debate so that an amendment trying to hold them to their own manifesto promise wouldn't get debated. That's not politics, that's procedural sabotage. It's like promising to discuss something important with your partner, then talking about everything else until they fall asleep and claiming you never got around to it. McDonnell called it shameful, and honestly, it's hard to argue with that assessment. You can disagree with him on plenty of things, but the man's got a point here.